Okay. What's up, people? Yeah, I was working on putting some new overlays and stuff, but I didn't get done, so we're just gonna roll with this for tonight. If we gotta pull stuff up, we can pull up here right on Ben Franklin's eyeball. Okay. Hope everybody's doing good. What's up, people? Been doing pretty good. Yeah, I was working on putting some new overlays and stuff, but I didn't get done, so got a little echo here. Let me see if I can fix that. Take care of it. All right. Not sure if anybody's watching yet. Here we are. So the whole idea of this metapolitic is not to just skim the surface of whatever we're talking about. We're going to talk about like current events and everything, how we used to, but try to dive into the historical, ideological, and philosophical depths, like the roots of all this stuff, and look at kind of the ways that they shape our conversations today. So I'm James. I'm on a quest to explore the roots of today's ideology and political conversations, and even better, to cultivate dialogue in the spirit of Socrates and Stringfellow Barr's notes on dialogue. If you're not too familiar with that stuff, I'll post some links in the chat here in a sec. Um, but they're also available. We have a Facebook group that's all about mutual inquiry type discussion. No trolling, no rage baiting, no typical social media conversations like you have. It's a pretty well curated community where we don't tolerate that kind of stuff. So, um, yeah, let's see what we can see. So, we're going to cover a lot: the assassination attempt, um, the Olympics. Do we have to? The presidential race, some of the mudslinging stuff that's been going on there. But before we dive into everything, I want to take a minute to talk a little bit more about the stream in general and just dialogue, our mission, and how cool-headed evaluation of what's going on in the world of political information, the sources of information we get, and everything are more important now than ever. So we're functioning in a time, or dysfunctioning in a time, where misinformation is everywhere. And although the internet has connected us in a lot of ways, opened up lines of communication that they weren't there before, it's increased our ability to see what's going on and get informed. It's also easier to get caught up in echo chambers and reinforce what we already believe, or even get taken down paths that we might have been just dipping our toes into, thanks to how the algorithms work. So the problem with that is it led us into, and continues to increasingly lead us down this path of extreme polarization, where we get so entrenched in our views that it creates this extreme division and hostility. And it's almost like when we come across somebody who thinks differently to us, it's almost like they're an alien, or like I don't know, it seems hostile, like at first contact. So it's a lot harder to trust each other and to know what's real, to know what is that. Like, how many times have you come across something that was satire, but you thought it was real, or somebody else thought it was real because it was believable, given how ridiculous some of the things that we're actually seeing going on in the world are. And I've experienced some of that stuff firsthand. Doing this, have gotten threats and just typical internet, like bullying stuff. Um, people talking trash about your kids, people talking trash about how you look, how you sound, um, and just kind of some of that more base level uh, human behavior. So, yeah, you can see how it's dangerous. And I mean, luckily, it hasn't really affected me in a bad way. But I think for me, it's just like the tip of the iceberg. because I'm really just getting started doing all this, and I don't have a huge viewership or following yet. So I'm prepared for it to get much worse. So if anybody has any input or stories or recommendations with that, I'd love to hear it. Um, so let me ask, if any of y'all ever had a conversation with somebody where you didn't necessarily agree completely or maybe at all, but there was something different about it, than you're kind of vibing and sharing thoughts and not really in the spirit of trying to show how smart you are or prove that you're right and they're wrong, and you're not really worried about what other people who are looking, third party, are thinking. It's like more of a one-on-one experience, and you're having a good talk with somebody, and you're exchanging points and counterpoints and sharing things that and it's almost exciting, like you both are kind of learning from each other about things and perspectives that the other person has that you didn't know. And you're just trying to really like get to the bottom of whatever you're talking about rather than, you know, show how intellectually superior you are or whatever. Um, and I hope that you have had an experience like that. If not, hopefully you will. Especially with some of these kind of like tools and things that we're talking about, hopefully that'll make it easier. That's really the whole point of this. But if you have, think about how it felt. You know, like why can't they all be like that? Why can't that just be like the default mode that we use to talk to each other? Um, is it our pride that gets in the way? Is it like the desire to be right and avoid looking bad to other people, or to something more internal, like we don't want to feel stupid, or I don't know. I think a lot of times, maybe for me, it's the way that people come at me. I think a lot of us are really reactive, which is human. Um, so if somebody's coming at you, attacking you, or coming at you like in an aggressive, hostile way in a conversation, it's natural to defensive and um, it's in some cases it might even be necessary. Really, you can't really have a conversation with somebody who's not open to it. So it might be a waste of time or whatever, but you might have to defend yourself if they're just trying to make you look bad or put you down in front of a bunch of people or something. But I've found like there's been certain cases where with bringing these kind of things up, I've been able to like get people to chill out and get to the point where we can talk a little bit. Even if we don't agree or we don't end up seeing eye to eye on the thing or changing each other's mind, at least like we had a decent conversation and kind of found some common ground, and we didn't end up just wishing each other were non-existent. But yeah, I get that it's really difficult even without considering the algorithm and the linguistic framing and all this stuff that we're up against. I get that it's a challenge, just to do it in and of itself. And that's what we're going for, generally speaking, is trying to get to that point where we can have conversations like that. So let me post these links for everybody. I got a few different platforms going on here, so I have to share it to Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. So give me just 1 second. The first one is the Notes on Dialogue, which I think is a really good guide on how to just how to structure dialogue in general. So here's that. Like I said, this is on the group also, and like the group description, so I'll give you the group. Okay, go to Facebook. It's a Facebook group. So we're working on getting a Discord community up and going. For now, our kind of main dialogue base is the Facebook group. So there's that. And the other thing that I referenced so far was just Socrates' dialogue, and like his self. The String Shovel Bar talks about it in the notes on dialogue. Basically, kind of understanding conversations in two different ways. One is where, it's like your typical verbal wrestling match where you're trying to win and defeat your opponent. It's like a debate format almost. All debates are pretty much that. And then on the other hand, you have Socratic dialogue where it's based on an exchange of ideas that, where at least not always, usually Socrates was speaking with people who weren't trying to engage in the same kind of dialogue, but he was pretty masterful at kind of redirecting it using his irony and his questioning technique, everything. But that form is called dialectic or Socratic, some people call it, but it's really based on the idea that Socrates, the wisest man in Athens, because he knew he didn't know. So he was coming from that place of like not assuming that he knew and remaining skeptical and agnostic about things and trying to kind of get to the bottom. I mean, he did express some of his own views and beliefs and stuff, but I don't think he really clung to them as tightly as a lot of us do, where we kind of like identify our personality even with some of these things. And it's like when people are, I mean, think about any of the talking heads in politics, really. And it's kind of unfortunate that like our media and those things are set up in a way to where it it kind of pigeonholes people into these like perceptions, like they become caricatures of themselves in a way. Like trying to think of a good example here. Um, Anybody really? I guess we could pick anybody. Like an Alex Jones or like a Russell Brand. Russell Brand was pretty left wing until he started getting attacked by some of like the moral, like woke cancel culture stuff, claiming that he was sexist, and he got wrapped up in the whole Me Too. And then he was still like with his, freedom kind of libertarian stuff, but that kind of, he started gaining a following in the right, like the extreme kind of conspiracy theory, right? And so he like went over into that, and it's like you can't get out of that now, because if you say things that are going to upset your audience and like that's how you make all your money, it's going to mess you up. So it happens a lot, and it's almost like if you threaten those ideas, you're threatening that person's personal identity and their livelihood. So they'll like really defend it tooth and nail because they identify with it so much. And I think a lot of us do that, maybe not on such an extreme level because we're not necessarily making money off of it, or otherwise, it's not like a part of our public image. I mean, it could be, I guess, in like a smaller kind of setting, but um, I do think it's like a tendency for us as humans to kind of identify with our beliefs as like a part of who we are and what we stand for. We hold some of those beliefs like very deeply, and we cherish them as like, you know, these kind of like exalted, untouchable things that nobody should dare question or threaten or whatever. And I think that's not a great place to come from, especially if we're trying to have a conversation. But I think just in general, like if we have a commitment to the truth and to understanding what's going on in the world, or what, how everything fits together in the bigger picture, it might be that we'll come across something that'll challenge that, and we have to be willing to let go of it. And I think part of it too, it stems from like this really deep desire to want to have some kind of security and feel grounded and know what's, know what we believe in, know who we are, and that kind of thing. So I think that's another reason why it seems so serious and like so life and death sometimes. People question our moral foundations or our deeply cherished beliefs because, yeah, they seem, you know, like if we get that rug pulled out from under us, we have no solid ground to stand on, and we're going to be in free fall and not really understand the world and be able to function. And I understand that, but it's curious that that is just kind of like a fact of life, like nothing really is. There isn't really a lot of solid ground or things to hold on to. Like dynamic, it's ever changing, it's always evolving. So, um, you see like kind of conventional wisdom, like memes, platitudes, stuff about that sometimes about like if you stay in the same place, you're gonna get run over by the train or whatever that, you know. So, yeah, I think that's an important thing to consider also when it comes to, being willing to let go and reevaluate some of those things that we really like deeply cherish and hold to be true. Anyways, um, so yeah, tonight let's talk about how to navigate all that, especially online. All the online information, stuff people are saying, what people are talking about, where this information is coming from, and to be able to do that with a critical eye and avoid some of the pitfalls that lead to those like extreme outcomes where dialogue just becomes a non-starter. Um, so it's all about finding common ground and understanding that when we see things differently, well, we get fixated on that and be like, this person is an idiot or they're different than me. But yeah, Derek, man, thanks for asking, dude. I do think, yeah. I mean, certain things seem pretty obvious, right? Just like I mean, for some people it's religious beliefs, but I mean, just think about like super basic things like um like theory of gravity or like it's pretty certain that like when you wake up in the morning you're gonna be able to walk on the earth the same way that you did the day before. So I don't think they're all just like up in the air so much. Um, but that is a really good topic, like to dig into how that works, like with science and scientific discovery and all those kind of things. I think it's a really interesting field, like that I've with my because if you don't know, I did philosophy in undergrad. I'm about to retire here, so I'm looking at doing econ for my postgrad. But I love philosophy, man, and a lot of people think those conversations are just silly and a waste of time, and it's like, how do you even know anything? But yeah, I think it is really interesting to look at some of that stuff and like the whole idea of philosophical skepticism and everything. I was kind of even reluctant to put the word skepticism in the title because I know that's a big turnoff for a lot of people, especially religious folks, because nowadays, usually most people, when they think about skepticism, we think about like atheism or like religion is bullshit. Hey, Carlicia, thank you. That's super cool. Welcome in. Um, but yeah, like the original skeptics, it goes back to Socrates and Plato again. It's kind of like the whole idea of questioning everything. And it kind of branched out into a bunch of different schools after Plato died. But one of the schools, they were so extreme in their skepticism that they believed that. They believed like there's no way that we can know anything at all is true. Even that statement, like to say that you can't know anything is true, you can't even know if that's true. So so I don't know. It is a good conversation. It's a funny conversation to have. Thanks for asking, Derek. So yeah, let's jump into it, man. I wanted to talk a little bit about like the political landscape and just stuff that's going on in politics right now and how much of a mess it is, to be honest. I mean, it's always been a mess, really, if you look back. Um, I think we kind of tend to like romanticize or oversimplify some of the history things. Granted, like, yeah, it's a pretty tense right now, and we're in a crisis era and all that. Like, but so there's some things that we could look back and say like, oh, it was better back then. It was easier and not as you know, not as polarized. So we are seeing more and more polarization than ever. People have dug into their political camps, but yeah, it's always been kind of a mess. Um, but the way that information gets spread these days, especially on social media, can make it worse. With the algorithms, like we were talking about, they keep feeding us the same viewpoints over and over. We train them to know what we like and what we want to see, and then they kind of train us to. I think it works a lot like I think this is one of those patterns that like repeats over and over in nature. And like in neuroscience, they talk about how one of the best analogies I ever heard about how your neural circuits form over time is that when you're really young, your brain is kind of like it's like fresh snow, and then when you walk, not necessarily better. Yeah. I think you're right, man. Because it's yeah, like people just we didn't see everything that was going on as much. A lot harder. A lot of the things that people thought were conspiracy theories ended up having like some modicum of truth, to them. Like as more and more information came out. Like I remember when I was a kid, my mom was like super. I mean, she was always really into health and wellness and like natural diet and that kind of stuff. And she was very skeptical of the medical um, field, and doctors, and just how all that stuff worked. And as we come to understand more and more about that, like a lot of the things she was afraid of and thought was true, like even though what she was saying at the time seemed super fringe, and people were kind of like, "You're weird," uh, it ended up being true. So yeah, that's a good point, man. Um, But yeah, I was saying the whole like neural pathways thing in the snow, walking in the snow, you leave footprints, right? So if somebody else takes that path and then somebody else takes that path and over and over, it eventually digs out a path there. And that makes it just easier for other people to follow it. And that's kind of how your neural connections form. They get stronger and stronger with repetition. And I think the algorithm works the same way with us, like into that kind of feedback loop that we have with it. It just strengthens these viewpoints that we have and can push us even farther down into those rabbit holes and make it harder for us to see things from other angles. So, like I was saying earlier, if we've gone far enough down in that direction, and then we come across if we got like I hate like bringing up left right stuff, but if we got like pushed down, into like a Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate, like red pill, that kind of like belief stuff, stoicism and like alpha male, and we're like really into that, and then we come across somebody talking about how like men need to be more compassionate and loving and caring. It's like, no, that person's just an idiot, man. Like, what are they talking about? Like, that's the opposite of what all these guys are saying. So it seems like out of touch with reality, but it's not really like reality as a whole. It's just like our little bubble reality that the algorithm built for us. So I don't know. Let's think about like the recent stuff. Like, there's the Olympic boxing decision, all the mudslinging leading up to the presidential debates and VP debates. I don't know. Folks get fixated on what's happening like right now in the moment, and sometimes it's good to step back and look at the big picture and the context and the history and the big ideas that guide us and led us to this point. Um, yeah, and it's really hard to talk about those kind of things if we're just automatically falling into line and these like you know argument lines, and like the media is even just feeding us stuff to parrot. And then like, of course, that's a funny thing too. Is like when we start accusing people, other people of doing that, we're like, "You're just a media parrot," and then we're doing the same thing that they're doing, just parroting views. I think like there's one of the seven habits of Stephen Covey. He talks about this is one of those like principles. I think there's a lot of different ways you could say it. Stephen Covey didn't have like the first or the last um, iteration of this principle, but he says one of the seven habits is speak first to understand and then to be understood, because everybody's trying to be understood. Everybody wants to be heard, but not enough people have the time or just the wherewithal to listen to the other person first. So if we listen to the other person and try to understand them, um, they might be more willing to then listen to us. So I think that's like it's not necessarily true. It might even be like a less than 50% success rate or something. But I think it if we don't do that, if we don't try to like extend that olive branch at any point, it's just there's no it's a non-starter. Um, Thinking back, there's even more stuff like that people kind of fell into camps on, um, like the Maui fires. Um, yeah, I don't know, but anyways, even with all these divisions, I think it's important to realize, like, for most of us, whether we believe like the way out of the political quagmire is to support like far right ideas and ideology or far left ideas and ideology. When we look at the situation that we're in and the way things have been going over the last, shoot, I mean, I want to say since, like the 50s ish, but you can even trace some of the roots of some of these things all the way back to the beginning of America. Um, but, like the economic inequality stuff, like the wealth gap and the concentration of power in the federal government, the executive branch, and the monopolization of the market, like the things that people talk about, like how it used to be thousands and thousands of companies controlling like this industry or that industry, the food industry, for example, and now it's like three companies, and those companies are probably owned predominantly like by BlackRock and Vanguard, and those kind of things. We look at that kind of stuff. Um, we who are not like the about 6,000 or so people in the world that are actually running stuff and have like the financial and political power to impact everybody else and the way things are going in the rest of the world. If we're not one of them, we have more in common with each other than we do with them. And I don't want to paint it like an us against them necessarily. Um, but I just think it's interesting that we spend so much time uh, getting at each other's throats about like what do we do about all this? How do we get out of this? And how do we make things better for ourselves who are in this position? Um, and in doing that, like we kind of just feed into like what their whole program, like, and I say program too, that it's like literally it's programs now. It used to be like a metaphor to say that. Now it's like literally they're writing programs to kind of corral us into behaving in the ways that are beneficial to them, and like we're kind of like cattle or something in that way. and we're NPCs in their game that they're playing. Um, the corporate influence on politics. Thomas Jefferson used to talk about that in the old days, like how the dangers of having wealthy corporations and banks take over control of the government. And I'm not saying like the best way. It seems like the only outlier because that whole system. After the fall of the USSR and the Cold War, um, that was the big thing, right? The ideology, capitalism versus communism, and after communism was pretty much destroyed, it took over the world, and just that whole idea, we're seeing like the results of it worldwide for the most part. And it seems like the only holdout now really is China. I guess you could say North Korea, but like nobody really is going to take that seriously. Like North Korea, yeah, they're closed off from the rest of the world and pretty much untouchable, impenetrable through like social media or any of that stuff. So they won't fall victim to some of the things that we're dealing with, but obviously, like from what we know about them, that if we had to choose between one or the other, we'd definitely choose this situation that we're in. And it might be the same with China. It might be the same. I don't know. Um, I've heard a lot of things about negative and positive about China. Obviously, like the negative stuff is the authoritarianism and then like disappearing people and you not being able to criticize the government and like less freedom of speech and those kind of things. But it's interesting. I was talking to like a retired warrant officer who he did 30 years in the Marines. He was a warrant officer in the intel community in the Marines. And then he retired. He joined a group that I used to volunteer with a lot called Team Red, White, and Blue, and we were doing a volunteer event together. And we were talking about this kind of stuff, and he was saying that after he retired, he worked for the Department of Homeland Security, like consulting on intel stuff and whatever. And he said he was like privy to some, kind of high level conversations that were going on with some of the executives of the big five of the military industrial complex, like Boeing, Lockheed, and all them. And that he said it was funny to him that he thought like when they would talk to Congress people, you would think the Congress people would be the ones telling them what to do and what was going to happen and what the rules were with all that stuff, like the top secret information and technology and everything that they were developing. And he said that that wasn't the case. It was the opposite. It was that these executives were telling our government what was going to happen, and that they were saying like, they're going to have to market this technology to the public or overseas, like they're going to redact some stuff and change this or that or whatever. But when our Congress people had objections to some of this because they didn't want the other places to get an advantage over us or to know like some of the technology that we've been developing, that they were pretty much like, well, the important thing is that we got to make money off of this. And I don't know, I thought that was crazy to hear. I mean, it wasn't surprising at all, but what I told him was, I thought about it for a second. I was like, yeah, that's crazy, man. I bet China doesn't have that problem. Like, I'm not saying that they're better than us or anything, but I bet they're not dealing with that issue. They keep their big companies in check. Like, that's what they did to Jack Ma. Like, he was getting too big and too powerful. And all right, stop, or else. And you hear stories about that sometimes, like capitalists over there getting put in jail or disappearing, something happened to them, whatever. But yeah, it's just something interesting to think about, like how the whole world scene is shaping. And it's like the tech companies and the banks are pretty much running the whole world now, except for pretty much except for China. Um, and some of the things like that get brought up a lot and that I think about, as the downsides of what has been happening on our end is obviously like the surveillance of our public, like the NSA surveillance, and of course the companies are doing that. I heard that Blackstone, not BlackRock, but Blackstone. What's up, CJ man? Good to see you, bro. Yeah, I heard that Blackstone, which is not BlackRock, right? People get that one confused sometimes. But Blackstone's a little bit smaller. They're still like investment capital, and they're one of those that companies that just buys other companies to make money, basically. But they bought Ancestry.com a few years ago, so now they own the rights to everybody's genetic information. So things like that, you know, they know more about us than we know about ourselves, basically, and it's crazy because they use that to, like we were saying earlier, they use that to kind of like corral us and control us and manipulate us. Um, Mainly for marketing stuff, advertising, and getting us to buy stuff and do stuff and like work work to spend our money on stuff. But it's a concern, especially how it ties into like the government surveillance, data collection, and everything. Like I heard Montana banned TikTok for that reason, and I heard some other like American investors and everything are trying to acquire TikTok and portions of TikTok to take it out of like its independent state and its ties to possible ties to like Chinese government, which it's not even Chinese, which is, I mean, I'm not the most savvy and up to date on like the everything about TikTok. Maybe there's a lot of people that know a lot more about it than me. But as far as I know, the guy who started it's like Singapore based. So, anyways, so another thing like it's part of it, and I think it gets brought up sometimes, and I wanted to talk to everybody about the media manipulation. That's like a huge thing. Like, and Trump saying that the media is like the enemy of the people, and the fake news, and a lot of people point that out as like a reason why Trump is like a dictator type figure. Which I think there's like enough other things that we could bring up, maybe that like factor into that. But and I can see where people are coming from, but I also can kind of see like where he's coming from and saying that like it's so full of like manipulation tactics and misinformation and just bullshit that it's dangerous. Right? It's dangerous at least to like just believe whatever it's saying, especially like if it hits our confirmation bias. Anytime I see something in the news or the media and I'm like, yes, that's what I was trying to say. Um, for me, that's kind of like a trigger to like step back and think like, where is that coming from? Like, is that just because that's what I want to believe, or because they've gotten really good at hitting those triggers and doing all this framing stuff. Um, I know I mentioned framing earlier, but that's like they study the way that language affects our brain and how like different words and phrases cause us to think about things in different like scenarios. Um, like an example is, like if a candidate in a local government race or something wins an election, right? And a headline says something about like voter revolt. Um, that triggers stuff like in people's minds, like whether you agree with it or not. Like it could be somebody you don't like, but it frames it in a way to where it seems like there's some kind of like oppression going on, and there's people fighting against it, and they're rising up and like banding together, and so it kind of, even if you don't think and you like read it and you're like, oh, that's bullshit, still like puts your brain in the mode of thinking of it in that context. So they know that like if they phrase things a certain way and put your brain in like the mode of thinking of things in a certain way, then you're more likely to reach certain conclusions about certain topics and whatever. So they spend a lot of money on this every year, like billions, in pumping money into these think tanks, trying to frame language. Um, Man, I'm getting like a migraine aura. I don't know if anybody ever gets those, but it's like kind of blocks out your vision, so it's kind of hard to see. Um, so like in 30 minutes or so, I'll probably start getting a migraine. And it's weird because it's like really unfortunate that it's happening right now because it happens to me maybe like once a year. So I don't know. But anyways, bear with me because it's a little hard to keep track of my outline here, and it's hard to read the screen. Um, okay, yeah. So the media manipulation tactics and everything, or that's like another thing that we have to deal with. The same thing as happens in science and like scientific journals. It's harder for us to trust like the results of scientific studies because we've heard about so much corruption and company funded or certain interest group funded studies that even if some of these studies, if you actually look at the studies and read the studies, you can see like maybe you get a different impression that the results of the study implied something that what the people who wrote the paper are not implying. They're implying like the opposite or something contrary to that. Um, so a lot of stuff, especially like that I've read around SSRIs and mental health medication and that whole industry, but it's pretty rampant, really, in scientific literature and the whole like privatization of science at all. Like it's crazy too that the person who's like pivotal in the movement to kind of like privatize all that information and make people pay. Some of those journals are like very, very expensive. And making people pay for access to scientific journals. Um, his name was Robert Maxwell. He was the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's consort. But yeah, Robert Maxwell, he was pretty pivotal in privatizing scientific research and making money off of that. So we see a lot of those kind of figures too, and a lot of times those figures are really glorified, like these kind of egomaniacal. I just gotta. It's all about making money, and I don't care, like if it causes people to have less access to information that a lot of us think ought to be public and transparent. And that's another thing, like in general, is just like decreasing transparency. Um, it's obvious that like democracy and freedom and the freedom of people to participate in their own government is a lot easier if it's transparent and they know what's going on. But yeah, with all the misinformation and all the red tape, all the framing, all this stuff that we've been talking about, it makes it harder and harder. It's gotten harder and harder for us over time to even think about that as a possibility, which is unfortunate. Um, Another big thing, common ground, like unifying thing, I think that we all share or should share, regardless of political views. I know it's somewhat of like a political polarized issue, and a lot of people on the right like don't really give a shit about it or think that it's all bullshit and like conspiracy theory, misinformation, fake news. But environmental concerns, I think, are a big deal. Like we, one of the big ones that that mostly usually these conversations like center around climate change and global warming and whatever. And I think this ties into it, but one of the things that's like more near and dear to my heart is monoculture farming, and just the way that our farming methods are terrible. Like we pump all this government subsidy into these farms, like where they only grow corn. They only grow like a shitload of corn, and then when the corn season is over, the ground just like lays barren. And not only does it seem like that's a waste of time, it turns the land into desert. Because all the moisture, all the nutrients in the topsoil, all the bacteria get killed first of all by pesticides and stuff, but they get dried out. A lot of the carbon comes out of the ground too, which ties into the whole warming stuff. But um, I mean, a lot of that corn is going to like feed food animals, and then it gets made into like a bunch of different products and stuff that we use. That's like basically shit food, anyways. It's making us fat and just like causing all these health problems for us, all these like nutrient imbalances because the food isn't like very nutrient rich, it's energy rich. But anyways, the monoculture farming stuff is, I think, an example of some of like the environmental concerns because they basically are just pumping a bunch of fertilizer and pesticides into it every season and using up a bunch of water to irrigate it, and then they'll destroy the fertility of the soil. Like out here in California, they're talking about how a lot of the farmland is even getting salted because of that process. And what happens when that we get to the end of that rope? Like, does it cause a huge catastrophe? And there's like not enough food? Do we somehow pivot to other technology like vertical farming or like hydro farming or something to try to make up for it? Or I don't know how that pans out, but I think it's a concern for us. And who wants to turn like half of their country into a desert? Crazy. Um, Another thing is healthcare access. The struggle for affordable healthcare. I think that transcends political lines. Everybody wants a system that serves everyone fairly, but corporate influence gets in the way of making progress with that. Um, I know a lot of people hate the ACA and Obamacare, and those measures got rolled back pretty much immediately by Trump when he took office. But uh, the debate seems to hinge like ideologically around whether or not free market is going to solve the problem or not. And I have serious questions about that, like if free market solves anything ever. I get that the main thing it does is, if we're talking about economics, is solve like the distribution problem. I I read a book by a guy Joseph Cairns from University of Toronto, economics professor, and he spent several years in Cuba researching this. He wanted to write a book about, I think it's called like moral incentives, ethics, moral incentives in the market, or something along those lines. But he's talking about Cuba's economy, um, and he's like wondering if we could incorporate some kind of checks and balances into capitalist market to promote altruism and community and those kind of things, those kind of values that saw were really big down there. Because he said a lot of people think that if you just give people free stuff and you implement socialism or communism, whatever, then people are just going to be lazy and unmotivated and not innovate. But he said that's not what he really saw down there. He saw a lot of creative people, a lot of smart people, a lot of innovative people, and a lot of people who really wanted to and were willing to work and worked really hard. But the main problem was that there were groups of people sometimes that were waiting to work because they didn't get the resources where they needed to be sometimes. For example, there might be like a bunch of like home construction people waiting weeks and weeks for lumber to arrive before they can finish doing their job. So there's a lot of sitting around waiting for distribution of resources to happen effectively, compared to here where it happens pretty quickly and effectively. Because if they don't get them where they need to be, they lose money. And that's another criticism, from right wing economists that has always been there, that like there's a distribution problem. So he was kind of trying to come up with a system that still took advantage of capitalist mechanisms to solve the distribution problem, but didn't kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and just let the profit motive get unhinged from ethics and morality and what's good for people, and get to the point where it destroys community and divides people so much to where they can't work together anymore. Um, so yeah. We talked about that. We talked about echo chambers. Talked about so part of that too is this whole confirmation bias thing. I think we brought that up a couple times, but that's a big thing. Like confirmation bias is the tendency for us to want to have our beliefs confirmed by somebody else or some other source. So if somebody else is saying something that we agree with, um, we'll just like assume that it's true or accurate or whatever. Sometimes that's a trap, because I think sometimes people even do it on purpose, try to like draw people into these like bad, kind of like bad reasoning of why like something is true. But there's a guy, Jonathan Haidt. A lot of leftist people don't like him. They think he's kind of like a part of the intellectual dark web, and he's like inviting people who have more left-wing views to be sympathetic to the right. I mean, they might eventually say that about me, like because you're trying to build bridges, instead of just say how stupid and wrong they are. It might come across as being like a double agent or something. But anyways, he talks a little bit about that kind of stuff, like confirmation bias, the filtering information and everything, um, and how just divisive it can be. Forgot where I was going with that. This migraine's like starting to kick in. Um, the aura thing has gone away. I don't know if any of y'all ever get that, man, but it's a weird thing. It looks kind of like electricity, and yeah, it's pretty distracting. But yeah, he's got a really good, like, famous TED Talk video where he talks about like the moral underpinnings of left wing, right wing thought, and kind of like the different channels and lenses we use to evaluate stuff. It's actually really worth the watch. For instance, he talks about how um, there's something historically in humans, especially like you can trace it back to like tribal groups, where it's like in group, out group loyalty. It's easy to see that like way back then, if you're living in the woods with a bunch of people and there's another group of people you run across, you see that in like survival, post-apocalyptic survival shows and stuff all the time too, where it's like, can we trust them? Are they friendly? Are they going to try to kill us and take all our stuff? So you think that would be pretty commonplace, and it's like some people are still functioning more on that level, where it's like we have to protect our people against like the people who are not part of our group. And I think it's also interesting, like how it factors into to There was a psychologist called Robin Dunbar. Maybe he was an anthropologist. I'm not sure. Sociologist, something like that. I know he did some work in like how your brain works, psychology, neuro stuff, and that most people on average can only have a close emotional relationship with about 150 people max. Might be a little more, a little less, depending on the person, but um, he says that's like one of the reasons why things get chaotic and tensions rise, like when you get too many people together, is because it's hard to look at more than that many people as like your people. For your like brain is kind of hardwired for tribalism. But he's saying that like people who tend to think more along like right wing ideological lines, they value that in group out group loyalty a lot more. What's up, Michael? What's Monkey Sphere about? I haven't heard of it, man. Did I look it up? But yeah, man. So like that even kind of ties into the whole emotional manipulation stuff, which is part of the framing also. There's a lot of rhetoric and things that are just kind of designed to hit your kind of biases and your like emotional strings. And we got to be on the lookout for that. It's like it's another thing like the about how we work, right? We want to not only have that like solid ground and like black and white thinking, but we also want to not like waste a lot of time. Yeah, I'll check it out. Thanks, Mike. I'm gonna write it down actually. And let me know too if y'all want me to pull up any stuff here. I'm gonna. I've done that in the past, and I am planning on doing it in the future. That's why I got this whole background area. I was messing with some different layouts where we can pull up some, like YouTube videos or different things that we can talk about. Um, but yeah, I was saying like that the whole. So I don't know. It wasn't that long. It might have been. It might have actually been like 10 years ago. I don't know. But when Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for his behavioral economics work, that book is so good, man. Y'all haven't read it or come across like some of the content that's in there, I think it's worth checking out. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow, and it kind of undermines that whole like classical idea that oh, it's all right, Tree. What's up? How you doing? Kind of undermines like that whole classical idea of like how the marketplace works and how economics works, where it's like the Adam Smith kind of basic conception is that like you have all these rational actors acting in their own self-interest to make all these choices and purchases and trade decisions that are going to benefit them, and eventually if everybody does that it works out for the best for everyone, the invisible hand or whatever. But what Daniel Kahneman was saying was that that's just like really not the way our brains work. We don't always act rationally, for one thing, and we don't always make decisions in our best interest because our brains developed to save energy. We don't like to spend a lot of time really thinking hard and deliberately about things. It's easier for us to just like fall in line with a political ideology. Like, okay, this is what I believe, and this is what all the people that I agree with are saying. So this is what I'm going to say too, and that's that. No more time wasted on it. I'm going to move on with my life. Um, and that's why he calls it thinking fast and slow. Like when you think slow and you really try to analyze something, your brain uses up a lot more energy. Um, and from like an evolutionary perspective, that's not very efficient if you're just doing that all the time for everything. So your brain developed to take these kind of oversimplified shortcuts, and that leads us into these behaviors in the marketplace where we're not making rational decisions, we're not acting in our own best interest. One of the examples that he gave in the book that always stuck out to me was about organ donation. he was saying that he looked at all these data from different European countries about organ donors, and that this is a topic that people, it's somewhat controversial. People debate about it. They say, like, some people say, don't do it because they're going to harvest your organs and it's all a big scam and they won't resuscitate you and all that stuff. And other people are like, no, it's the morally right thing to do. There's a lot of people on organs donors waiting lists, and I want to, if I'm going to die anyways, it's the right thing for me to do to save somebody else's life, and blah, blah, blah. But what he found was that some of these countries had drastic differences in the amount of organ donors, registered organ donors that they had. And so he wanted to find out why. And in looking at the bureaucracy involved and like the forms that they, and the process that you have to go through to become an organ donor, said most of these countries, you do it like how we do, like at the DMV, where you're filling out a form to get your ID card. And he said you have to check a box or something. It's like a little question that says, check this box if you wish to become an organ donor. But in some other countries, it said, check this box if you do not wish to become an organ donor. And in the countries that said, check this box if you do not wish, where you had to opt out, they had way higher number of organ donors, you know, percentage-wise, than the countries that where you had to opt in. And he argued that it was because, like, when people are at the DMV, they're kind of in a row. They've been sitting there all day. They've been waiting forever. They want to get out of there. They're not like in the mindset to really sit down and think about, like, do I want to be an organ donor? They're just like, let me just fill this shit out real quick and get out of here. And I thought it was a really good example of how that works, how that, like, oversimplification stuff. And I think we do that same thing when we're talking online about politics a lot, where it's like, no, it's easier, like, to, I already know, because I don't want to waste time thinking about it. So I think it's important, like, going back to the whole, like, personal responsibility thing and everything, it's really important that we do that ourselves. When, like, try to catch ourselves in the act of doing that, you know? Easier said than done, but if we notice that we're dismissing something or oversimplifying something or not being willing to, like, think deliberately about it, it could be an indicator that we're using these little tricks, you know, to shortcut thinking about something we don't really want to spend a lot of time on. And it causes problems, you know? It makes it harder for us to understand for ourselves, like, what is really being talked about. It makes other people feel like we're not listening to them. Um, so we're kind of selling ourselves and selling everybody else short when we're doing that. These kind of conversations, it's almost better to just not even participate if we're doing that. And like I said, easier said than done, but I think it's important. What do you guys think? You ever come across any of this stuff? What do you guys think about any of the stuff we talked about? Any of the stuff that's been going on lately? We can talk about some of that stuff. Like, now that we kind of touched on some of it and talked about, like, the pitfalls, maybe we can actually, you know, talk about what's happening and try to get to the bottom of some things together. I know we're down to just a few people now, but I'm good with whatever. In the meantime, I'll repost these links. Here's the group. Put on the Facebook. And we can pull up the monkey sphere too. Let me see if I can get this. David Wong refers to the sphere of individuals as a monkey. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly, yeah, that's exactly like the Dunbar's number. You can grow your monkey sphere with social VR. Yeah, maybe we can pull up a video on it or something. Let me put the links on YouTube also. I think we have anybody on YouTube. I've done pretty much zero development work on YouTube. All right, let me see if I can get a window going. Window capture. Monkey sphere. Is that big enough?
The monkey sphere. Yeah, what's the monkey sphere? I want to talk about choosing your friends. I will shorten this whole idea, but I want you to realize what the monkey sphere is about. A writer actually came upon a study where they looked at monkeys and determined that within the culture of monkeyhood, that every monkey at its very most could only maintain 150 friendships, relationships at any one time. Any more, it was too much to actually absorb and to maintain. And the same thing can be said of us as humans. We can only maintain 150 relationships at once, which means, for those of you out there that have maxed out your 5,000 friends on Facebook, you don't have 5,000 friends.
Yeah, it's true.
I've spoken to 1 million students. I don't have 1,000 friends. I don't have any more, according to this study of the monkey sphere, than 150 that I really care about. It's why when I'm driving and somebody cuts me off on the highway, I want to run them over because they don't mean anything to me. Unless I came up beside that person and saw it was my grandma. And then I would go, oh.
Really good
and then I would
point,
try to guide her off the highway, you know? Because she's part of my monkey sphere. But there are so very many people that aren't part of that. And I'm afraid that some of us have online chosen to willingly expand that monkey sphere well beyond 150. In fact, there's a lot of us out there that are, quote, friends with people that we've never met. In fact, they're a friend of a friend of a friend, and we think we've seen them somewhere at a party or when we were at this, and we don't really know, and yet they're...
I mean, honestly, man, that probably applies to like most of the people I know in my life. Even like, you know, friends I've had from childhood and growing up and stuff like that. We drifted apart over time. I I don't feel like there. Brene Brown talks about this a lot too. You know, like your whatever she calls it. She says it's like about 5 people who are like your closest. Dunbar has like a similar thing. Let me see if I can find these like. Yeah, it's something like this. You know, it's like your closest people, like your very closest people. Then your next ring is like your close friends. This is kind of blurry, but let's see what happens. We zoom out. I want this. Thing. Why is this thing making me set up AI thing? All right, where'd it go? Oh, paywall. Anyways, maybe we can just look at it here. So yeah, I'm not sure if this is exactly accurate to what Dunbar was saying, but it's something like this. You know, you have these like kind of concentric rings of different levels of intimacy and closeness with people. Hey, what's up, Mike? How you doing, man? Good to see you, buddy. Thanks for coming in, man. I wish you would have been here for like most of it. We're about to wrap up soon, but dude, I hope you're well, man. I haven't seen you in a while or talked to you in a while. It has been a hot minute, yeah. That's Mike on Facebook. Um, so yeah, we were talking about how Michael Lane just said earlier in reference to something we were talking about. He brought up something about the monkey sphere that I had never heard of, but it was really interesting. It reminded me a lot of the Dunbar number stuff, which we're looking at here, where it's like it factors into like a problem with communicating with people online. You know, this guy in the video about the monkey sphere just brought up a really good point about like when somebody cuts you off in traffic and that you want to run them off the road or so you road rage, um, because they're not part of your sphere. And then he said, but unless I had pulled up beside her and I saw it was my grandma, then I'm going to try to help her out. Um, and that's kind of how this works. It's like these concentric rings of how close you are with people. And outside of this 150 number, where this big borderline is, it's like those people are the people you stop really caring about, you know, their well-being and their, you don't think of them as like allies of yours or people who are, part of your tribe, that you want to look out for and protect and take care of, and they're taking care of you and looking out for you and protecting you. You don't have that like kind of mutual feeling of being on the same team with. And that's problematic, like when we're having conversations with people online, because it's like they're just basically like an NPC to us. We can just blow them off or treat them, however we want to treat them, no consequences, which is dangerous. And I kind of tied it into the whole like Daniel Kahneman, thinking fast and slow, like taking shortcuts, and how your brain works, and it just naturally kind of goes like this, where it's easy for you to dismiss people like that. But I think there is a way to overcome it. I mean, some people like have come up with some really whack, like crazy. Not, I don't want to dismiss them and say that they're stupid or something, but they're eccentric. Like genetic experiments or like bio enhancing people with like cybernetic technology, where it's like going to enhance our human abilities, but beyond like what we're totally capable, like we're currently capable of biologically. Um, or like Benny Gesserit breeding programs, like in Dune, which is eugenics type stuff. So, not that I'm just like offhand dismissing any of that. I think those ideas are worth at least talking about and exploring. But I think the one thing we can do now immediately, without voyaging into any of that kind of later down the line type of solutions, is try to implement that deliberate, like thinking slow and implementing that compassion, like seeing other people like people principle, as much as we can, like when we can catch ourselves doing it. Otherwise, like it's better to just like opt out and not engage. You know what I mean? And I'm guilty of it just as much as anybody. Like I get bombarded with troll baiting, rage baiting stuff all the time on social media with some of the stuff that I'm sharing and talking about. And yeah, I get hooked by it sometimes. You know, like we were saying in the very beginning, sometimes it might even be necessary. Sometimes it might be that we have to, or we feel that we have to do that to kind of like uphold our public image or something or whatever. Oh man, that's great. Yeah, you were hanging out with your daughter. That's awesome. Yeah. Family time, man. We need that. Yeah, let's watch the rest of his videos. Super short.
Attached to us. And if your profile has all your information, where you live, your address, your phone numbers, your emails, all, and then everybody that is in that group has access. And my guess is, unless you're in that monkey sphere is 150, anybody outside of that really doesn't have your best interests in mind. If you have thousands of people that are friends with you, I would say there's a percentage of those folks that have nothing but ill intent to either get your password so they can get your credit card information, or to start up a conversation with you to get your interest in them and maybe have some evil intent. What I'm trying to say is this. You as a student, I would consider who you are choosing as friends. Because research tells us that there's really just quite a few that we can have a relationship, 150 in fact. Any more than that, and we can't possibly know or have a relationship with those people. So my encouragement is for all of us to think about, take a step back, see what we have going on social media wise, online, and if we're really just trying to rack up the number of friends just because we want to be awesome, or whether we really do know all the people we're in.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I don't know if like just limiting it is. Yeah, I think he started out with monkeys, and then he went to humans also. So I don't know how true that is either. I don't know what his references are, if he's listing anything here, or what. But he does. He did say humans also. Right here, yeah. The culture of monkeyhood. Every monkey at its very most can maintain 150 relationships at any one time. It's way too much to absorb, and then us as humans can only maintain 150 relationships at once. I think it's also like you have to understand that it's not like a set in stone number. It's different for everybody because everybody's like biology is so crazy. It's so like diverse and like so many different outcomes all the time. Like there could be people that could easily maintain 500, and then other people who struggle to maintain maybe 20. I don't know. I don't know if that's like too aggressive of a range because I'm just making shit up. But it wouldn't be surprising to me. And maybe in extreme cases, maybe like disabilities and stuff considered. But yeah, it's so like that's another thing that I bring up in philosophy all the time is that like the world and the reality is not only just so dynamic, it's so nuanced and so complex that almost anything we say is a generalization. Like our language, our ability to grasp conceptually is so vague that it's not going to give us like the complete picture. There's a famous thought experiment in philosophy called the Sortes paradox or the paradox of the heap, where they ask how many grains of sand does it take to make a pile. There's a lot of different ways you can think about it. One is like, how many hairs does it take to make a person hairy or bald? You can apply it to like every concept, really. Evolution, I see it. Like speciation, when does like speciation occur? It's like people want to say there's like a line that once you cross that line, it's a new species. That's just not how it works. Like so many different factors involved that are vague and like it's cumulative. That it's not a distinct line. Same with consciousness, like how many neurons you could remove one neuron at a time from somebody's brain, and eventually they're going to lose consciousness. Which one was it? What's the straw that broke the camel's back? And it's that problem in language that like causes so much confusion with us trying to understand some of these things and like understand reality. So like 150 is just like a generalization. And I don't know about like the monkeys stuff. I read a lot of the Dunbar stuff and the human neurology stuff that relates to it. So he's really careful about that too, to explain that it's not 150 is like a approximation. So I also think though that it's like it's not like we're just screwed, you know, where it's like we have to limit our number of people. It's like, nope, I hit my max. It's 150. Like, no more friends. I'm not allowed to talk to anybody else on Facebook today. I got 150 already. I think that's a little silly, you know, like, and it's just like not realistic. I mean, there have been people in like Jean-Jacques Rousseau proposed that we arrest the development of civilization at the level of the village, because he saw that like once it got bigger than that, you started getting a lot of problems, you know, with just people doing like terrible things to each other and corruption and all that stuff, good bad governance. And I can see where he was coming from, and I'm not saying that that's a bad idea. I just think that it's like it's kind of like the cat's already out of the bag. There's no there's no going back to that. I mean, we could like start doing some kind of like alternative intentional communities and like limiting to them to that level. But all in all, it's like yeah, man. Is that your platform, Mike? Oh, thanks, dude. Thanks for the stars, bro. I appreciate you, dude. Yeah, Mike. I just saw you said you're running for city council in Chico. That's your hometown, right? Man, good luck with that, dude. I'm gonna have to follow your progress on that. Maybe I can put you in my Dunbar 150. But yeah, I think like something that I try to do, and I think we can all try to do, is to even like you don't have to make these people that are outside of your tribe um, members of your tribe per se. You can still treat acquaintances. We can all still treat acquaintances and people that we don't know like as human beings, and as if they are kind of like temporary members of our tribe. You know, maybe still treat them with like some additional level of wariness and not as implicit trust. But you know, we could still like extend that olive branch and deliberately take the time to like slow down our thinking and our reactions and kind of deal with people and not treat them like NPCs or whatever. Inevitably, it's going to happen. You know, like we go out and go to the grocery store, we're not going to like stop and you know tell everybody that we meet how great they are or whatever. I'm laughing because it reminded me of something my mom brought up to me. I asked her a while back, like, who are some of the people that, you know, were really influential to her and that she really liked growing up to listen to what they had to say and everything. She brought up this guy called Dr. Love, he was pretty much famous for doing that. You know, he would like stop people in elevators and say like, this is gonna be my only chance to like meet you, and I want to take this opportunity to like, you know, tell you that I think you're like a important person and not make you feel like I'm just blowing you off, passing by, and not like caring who you are or whatever. So you know, which is cool. I feel like a lot of the best of us, you know, they do that. They kind of make it a point to go out of their way to make everybody feel like a human being and to make everybody feel acknowledged and seen and cared for. Um, yeah, it's a challenge for sure. It's a challenge. What I was saying and why I pulled up the thing earlier too is let me pull it back up. Let me pull this one back up. This is that blur. It's kind of nasty. Anyways, let's just use this one, or maybe we can get it on the this page. Oh yeah, it's the paywall thing. My bad. Short-term memory loss. So Brene Brown talks about this too. She talks about like how in these smaller circles, these are basically this like 1.5 or whatever. This is like your intimate partner, or maybe the one or two or very few people that you like implicitly trust with everything in your life. I think for Dunbar, he says 5. Maybe he's not. Maybe this is just adding on to that, where it's like an even deeper level. But these are basically people that you trust, like you would trust them with your kids, taking care of your kids, your bank account, like they're, you know that they got your back no matter what, and they're not going to screw you over. You guys love each other, and you're like ride or die, basically. Um, and then it kind of like expands out from there with like the levels of trust um, diminishing, and that's fine. It's not like you have to trust everybody that you meet with your bank account, or else you guys can't be. You know, it's like it doesn't mean that these people like have to be enemies or adversarial, or you treat them like they're not people. And that's the point I was trying to make. I think like to be able to do that, it takes some deliberate like self-regulation, emotional regulation, and like and deliberate thinking. Um, but I think it's possible. You know, we don't have to road rage when somebody cuts us off. If we can catch ourselves, practice like a personal practice in emotional regulation, and yeah, I think that's something that we can do immediately right now um, to try to like improve the quality of our online interactions with other people and everything. Yeah, Mike. So I'm about to wrap up here, but I will be following. I opened up your Facebook page actually because I was trying to see if you have any information about it, or you have like a campaign. Um, you got like a campaign page or something going. If you got any information on that, man, DM it to me. I'd really like to follow along progress and how everything's going. Human desire to other people and populations comes from our fantastic ability to recognize patterns, but we have poor judgment on what. Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's great. Yeah, I think we did mention it a little bit. How like it's kind of rooted in our like early evolutionary development. It's pretty much hardwired. Um, so it really takes that like deliberate like self-regulation to be able to not go into like danger mode, you know, when we're dealing with other people. They talk about that in philosophy a lot too. You know, the Hegel talks about it. Nietzsche kind of talks about it a little. Hegel's like really the main one. He talks about something called Lord and Bondsman. Wow, it went straight to Marxism. Dude, that's funny. Yeah, here it is. Master slave dialectic. So he basically says that like when you recognize like an other, it's terrifying, and your natural reaction is like self-preservation. So you enter into this kind of like life, it would take, man, we would have to, if we wanted to talk about, we'd have to have a whole nother hour, I think. But basically, he says it sets up this kind of dynamic where it's like one person's the superior, the other is the inferior, and you can see, like, if you follow this, you can really see why, like, Karl Marx stole all this stuff from him, because it's basically like, it's more, he's talking about it more on like an emotional and even like spiritual level. But yeah, he basically says it sets up this relationship where the master or the lord is there. It's kind of like a codependency relationship thing where the bondsman is producing everything, and like they're the creative force that like produces and creates art, and like they create value, like they create the world, and the lord like takes ownership of it and like wants to take like say it was their own creation, but really they know that it wasn't. Like they have no inherent intrinsic value of their own, so they depend on the bondsman for that. So like they have this kind of like dance going on forever, which he thought like eventually resolves itself. But anyways, yeah, it's like that's a whole rabbit hole to go down. And it's really funny too that I always bring up how Marx wanted to take, because Hegel was an idealist and he believed that like the world consisted mainly of like thoughts and mental, like the substance of reality wasn't physical. It's not like particles, it's ideas. It's all mind or consciousness, which is echoed today in a lot of like panpsychism, and some of the quantum physics people even go down into those rabbit holes. But um, during the time Marx was doing his thing, it was like the post-enlightenment period, but it was where everybody was like super obsessed with like science and empiricism and scientific validation of everything. So he and pretty much everybody else who was doing anything at the time wanted their ideas and theories to be like very scientific. So Marx called his Hegel called this like the dialectic process, and Marx called his shit dialectical materialism. And he claimed that it was like the scientific version. Like, this is what Hegel got wrong. He wasn't scientific about it. It was actually class struggle and things rooted in reality, not spiritualism. So I don't know. I think that's interesting. Maybe we can talk about that kind of stuff like in a later, like next week or whatever. Um, how I kind of see, like, in a lot of people, I think, are seeing a shift like away from materialism and like scientism, into like a re-embrace of like some esoterica and spiritualism, and some of those kind of ideas, like Jungian psychology, for one thing, which is interesting because he was during that like sciencey time. Yeah, kind of, yeah. Age of Aquarius. Which, like, yeah, I mean, there's so much stuff about it, like the um, sacred geometry and all that. Like, it's really cool. Like, there's a guy that I follow on YouTube who I think is like one of the best at putting a lot of those ideas into relatable and understandable terms, at least for me. When I play that stuff, like my kids and my girlfriend are like, I can't understand this guy. He sounds like the teacher from Charlie Brown. So maybe like maybe you won't like him as much as I do. But his channel name is Formscapes. He talks a lot about that kind of stuff, like astrology and magic is real, the metamorphosis of human awareness. And this is all really good content. Anyways, I'm gonna wrap it up, y'all. I'm really glad I got to see everybody. I'm gonna do some work during the week on these overlays. Try to be adding like better stuff to the stream, more features. Get some chat bots in here. I'll do some work to like invite some more people. See if we can get a bigger group and have a party in here next time throughout the week, because today I only did today. But I appreciate all you guys, and have a good night. I'll see you next time.